if we can step into the practical, where we're talking about historical and philosophical, into the practical of today, what are some of the exciting policies that represent democratic socialism today, modern socialism? I think you mentioned some of them, Medicare for all or universal health care. Something you haven't mentioned is tuition-free college, increase in minimum wage, maybe stronger unions like we talked about. What are some ideas here? What are some ideas that are especially exciting to you?
Well, I think that hours reduction has always been an important demand for socialists. It's been a reality in certain countries like France in recent decades, where part of the logic is if you have a bunch of people working for 40 plus hours a week, and you also have some unemployed people who would like more employment, then it's not a zero-sum game. You could reduce hours to 35 hours and still maintain the same output by employing more people to kind of fill the slack in hours. So one, I think it's a solidaristic thing in working class movements between unemployed and employed workers. I also think that, it gives people more time. So Marx was a big advocate in his day of a 10-hour bill in the UK that would have reduced the hours of working time and reduced eliminated or reduced child labor and other things as well. And part of it was this is a radical demand because it's reducing the sphere, as you saw, of exploitation. So it's putting limits on how much time the capitalists can take from ordinary workers and how much freedom they would have. With healthcare, one, I just think it's a government healthcare system. You could tell me that you don't want it in the U.S., but you can't tell me it doesn't work because we've seen it work in every other major industrial system in different forms.
So what does that usually involve? What does universal healthcare involve?
So there's different varieties. In the UK, for instance, they have a national health service in which medical personnel and hospitals are run directly by the state. It's almost like a mini Soviet system, to be honest, but just for healthcare. And it works pretty well just for healthcare. And I think it's one example of the way in which you could actually take the market. So I give you a vision of socialism that involves a lot of market, but I think there's certain spheres where you could remove the market from and still have an efficient system. In part because, this is a area in which people don't have, obviously for cosmetic procedures, whatever, they have preferences. But for most routine things that people do in healthcare, they just need to see a doctor. They need to get diagnosed. Some of these systems have had trouble with wait lists for specialists or whatever. That's more of like an allocation problem of if you want more specialists, you pay specialists more. Like this is just problems that could be solved by through the mechanisms of planning and government run healthcare. So that's kind of the most left wing that you could get is what the system in the United Kingdom. Beyond that, you have a system like Medicare for all, where you say, all right, most of the doctors, besides for public hospitals that already exist, are going to be privately employed by hospitals. Now, hospitals are going to be private. But instead of having all these different insurance carriers, we're just going to have one national insurance carrier that we're all going to pay into. That national insurance carrier is going to negotiate the price of healthcare with doctors, the price of drugs with the pharmaceutical companies, and so on, to hopefully reduce prices and to implement a different little bit of planning into the system. Because if there's only one, big national insurance company, that company has a lot of weight and power, but you could still visit your same doctor, and there's still some. It's not as radical of a shift in that direction, and that's the dominant demand of Bernie Sanders and the left right now. There's 30 plus million people in the U.S. that would be insured that currently aren't insured. If we move to this system, there's a lot of other people that are underinsured or worried about how to pay co-pays or premiums involved. I think it would be a net benefit for the vast majority of the U.S. Population, even if it was offset with certain taxes, because we spend a lot of money out of pocket with health insurance, and it's a demand also that's widely popular. So for me, it's almost like if you're trying to build support for something like socialism, we were talking this lofty vision of socialism after capitalism, or what worker ownership, the means of production would look like in practice, and so on. And by the way, you're one of the few interviewers who ever asked me any of the details. So it's good that I've been thinking of a rough sketch in my head for the last, whatever, 16 years that I've been a socialist. But we have to start in the here and now. And if you can't convince people that the state should play a bigger role in their health insurance, and you can't convince Americans in a whole host of other sectors that they should be living in something closer to social democracy, how are you going to convince those people that there should be worker ownership of the means of production?
Yeah.
It's kind of a ridiculous leap if you don't have the credibility as the group of people organizing for universal health care, organizing for a $15 minimum wage, and able to get the goods. And also in practice, as we fight for these reforms, ordinary people will have a better sense, at least my hope is, of what it means to be involved with politics and what politics can do for their lives. It's positive. Because right now, when we talk about politics, it often just seems that we're talking about like a very glib cultural conflict removed from the things that are important in our lives. Whereas in truth, I think politics can be a tool for us to make our lives better.
Yeah, and there's like deep ideas here where, in some sense, universal healthcare and worker collectives are not so radically different. That there's philosophical ideas to explore and accept. And also, from my perspective, at least, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it seems like with a lot of things at the core of politics, the right answer from an alien perspective is not clear. Like everybody's very certain of what's the right answer. Everyone's certain universal healthcare is terrible, or in the case of universal healthcare, majority of people think it's a good idea, but I don't think anyone knows. Because I think that depends on cultural history, on the particular dynamics of a country, of a political system, on the dynamics of the economic system in this country, of the changing world. The 21st century is different than the 20th century. Maybe the failures of communism in the 20th century will not be repeated in the 21st century. Or the flip side of that, maybe capitalism will actually truly flourish or with the help of automation in the 21st century. Like, I don't think anyone knows. So like people like you are basically saying, like, arguing for ideas, and we'll have to explore those ideas together. Why do you think, if universal healthcare is popular, why don't we have universal healthcare in the United States?
Well, democracy is a great thing. Political democracy is wonderful. It came from the struggles of ordinary people to expand suffrage and so on. But the economic sphere, entrenched power in the economic sphere, bleeds into our political democracy. So I think there's a lot of people with a vested interest in not having universal health care. There's large industries with a vested interest in not having universal health care. They pay for ads, pay lobbyists, they influence government, and they have made it very difficult. So you can't get universal health care done without the bill. Even if you pass something and you're trying to make a change, like Obamacare was supposed to have a public option. Everybody's been running on a public option in the Democratic Party for 12, 13 years. Why don't we have a public option? People know that if people have the choice of buying into a government plan, they might just that might be the slow road to really having universal healthcare. So I think a lot of it's opposition.
Do you like that idea, the public option? Maybe you can, like, because isn't there complexities like pre-existing conditions? So isn't a public option mean you can not have any insurance until you get into trouble, and then you can, if it covers pre-existing conditions, just start paying for insurance then? Therefore, young people don't pay for insurance. Isn't it better to go full in?
I don't support a public option, in part because I think if we allow politicians to just say, hey, I support a public option, well, it's just kind of a way to signal your support for universal health care, but give us nothing. And I think that's what we saw with Biden and a lot of other politicians that have supported public option. I think in practice, if a public option is defined in such a way that it just means you by default can just opt in to a public plan, and let's say hypothetically you don't even have to pay for it, then it's just a backdoor to universal healthcare really quickly. Because I think the vast majority of people who aren't currently covered, and also a lot of employers, to be honest, would probably drop their private coverage if they knew their employees can just get a public option, and maybe would only provide supplemental insurance or whatever else. But I think the broad overarching point of all these demands is to say that socialists need to be really connected to the day-to-day struggles of people to just improve their lives. So if you're feeling like you're paying $400, $500 on the Obamacare market for health insurance, and that's hampering your ability to do what you want to do in your life, then maybe you would support a candidate who's for universal healthcare. If you feel like you're struggling to find work that you could afford to pay your rent with or whatever else, maybe you'll support a candidate committed to all sorts of mechanisms to reduce housing prices or increase your power as a tenant, and whatever else. So I think it's like these day-to-day concerns need to be connected to the more abstract and lofty vision of change. Otherwise, our politics just becomes like this fantasy world thing that's nice ideas to think about or debate, but really won't make much of a difference in people's lives.
What do you think about free college? Should college be free?
So I would say free college is not at the top of my list of priorities, but it definitely should be free in my vision of a just society.
What is at your top? Just to clarify, is the universal healthcare up there?
Yeah, universal healthcare is probably
Sure.
far higher in my priorities than free college. I think right now the way our system is built, when someone goes to college, they're given credentials, they're given a degree they carry with them for the rest of their life. It gives them a chance to join kind of a privileged part of the labor market, right? It's not a zero-sum game. I don't want college-educated people to think that non-college educated people are their enemies and vice versa, because a lot of them are just ordinary working class people trying to survive, and they're in different areas, they're in different sectors. Some of them are in nursing sectors where they need a college degree and so on. But if you just make college tuition free, but you don't also make trade skills and other things tuition free for someone to learn how to become an electrician or a plumber or whatever else, then to some degree you're privileging one sector of the labor market over another. So I would advocate, just if you're going to make something like that free, you just have to make sure that you're doing it in an egalitarian way, and that the options, the routes to college are more equal. So there's more investment in K through 12 education, so that more kids in rough neighborhoods have the chance to go to college, and for those that choose the trade route from any part of the country, that they're given the skills and resources for vocational trainings, and that those are also free. And it just feels like, in terms of order of operation, I would just start with K through 12 education, improving it, and whatever else, then college after. But I'm not opposed to it.
So does that, improving K through 12 education, does that mean investing more into it? Is it as simple as just increasing the amount of money that's invested in public education?
In general, when it comes to the public sector or any sphere that you're investing in, obviously it's not just as simple as throwing money at a problem. I do think we have a lot of schools that are underfunded, but we have other schools that are adequately funded, but the conditions in which those schools are, like the neighborhoods they're in and what's going on in society, the problems are so deep that it's impossible for just education to solve everything. And I think especially a lot of liberals think that education should be the panacea. Invest in education, you'll help people. If kids are living in poverty, if they go into school hungry or whatever else, like, education's not going to give them everything they need to succeed. So sometimes I think, put too much weight on education.
And of course, you could define education more broadly, which is like the care of the flourishing of the young mind, whatever that is.
Yeah,
whatever you call it.
Early. Yeah, a lot of it starts with. So New York City, at least, we do have universal pre-K. So from age 3 onward, you have the option for that. I mean, it's important for kids' socialization. Their parents are now able to know that they could go to work or do something else and have their kids taken care of. There's a lot of measures like that we could do to equalize things. And again, for libertarians in the audience, some of this stuff is scary because it's obviously more state involved in pre-K. State is already very involved in K through 12. More investment into state institutions like our state universities and in college. But for me, it's not a question of state versus non-state. It's a question of you know good outcomes for people, and it just happens to be that for working class people, having the collective power to elect representatives that will build a broader safety net is in their interest. For upper middle class people, for others, they could afford to pay for their own provisioning either directly or through like Obamacare like schemes where you just get a subsidy and you pay the rest yourself and whatever. This is for really the bottom 40% plus of the population. They really don't have any options, so they prioritize other things, and they end up with some sort of injury or health problem or whatever else. And it's bad for everyone in society, but it's especially bad for the people at the bottom of the labor market.
So I saw various estimates for socialist programs like Social Security expansion, free college, Medicare for all will cost upwards of $40 trillion over 10 years, 40. Okay, they could argue with those numbers and so on, but so there's a cost. There's a taxpayer cost. Given the weight of that cost, can you still make the case for these programs, and then can you try to make the case against them that the cost is too high?
So I will not argue with you on the numbers because you just threw out random numbers. I do think universal healthcare, if done right, can be basically cost neutral. I think it's an exception because we spend a tremendous amount of money on healthcare, a huge percentage of our GDP. So I think it could be done in a way that's close to cost neutral.
Can you argue on the numbers without arguing on the numbers? So you're saying just your gut says that there's a lot of, depending on how these programs are done, there's a lot of variance in how much it will actually cost.
There's a lot of bureaucracy and billing right now in our healthcare sector, for example, that would be eliminated. There's a lot of costs that are spiraling upward, provider costs from both doctors, hospitals, but also pharmaceuticals to drug costs that insurance companies shoulder because their market share is too fragmented to really negotiate hard. Medicare can sometimes negotiate better rates, but Medicare for all would negotiate even better rates. So I think there's a cost spiral that we could adjust with more government involvement. And there's a reason why we spend a bigger share of our GDP on healthcare than other places. But let me just accept the broad premise that social programs cost money. Now, I think that one, for ordinary people, most of them, the trade-off of, even hypothetically, if taxes on lower middle class and working class people in certain cases go up, the trade-off would still be in their benefit because they're the ones who would be consuming more of those goods. And also our tax system and whatnot is progressive. So the rich will pay more. The majority will consume more of them. Also, I think a lot of these programs are the bedrock of a healthy society. So one reason, for example, that we have so much crime and violence in the U.S., there's lots of cultural and other causes with our level of gun ownership, American history, and so on. But one really important factor is just the level of poverty and inequality in the U.S. compared to other countries. That combined with guns and other factors means that we live in more violent, unequal societies. A European would be shocked by the fact that in even some of our nicest areas in cities and elsewhere, because there's a lot of rural violence too, it's just normal to have gun violence. It's normal to have drug-related violence. We have 400 or 500 people some years in like Baltimore, like a city of under 1 million, getting killed. These are all recipes for a society in which one, the public sphere is drunk like crazy because you're not going to go wander out for an evening stroll in a park if you live in a dangerous area or whatever else. Like the rot goes very deep, and a welfare state is one way to to live in a better society for everyone. There's been plenty of studies. There's one book called The Spirit Level on inequality that was quite popular, that just notes that inequality is really terrible for the psyches of the rich too, not just for the poor. So I think spending some more money living in a more just society is doable. There's different ways to address certain costs spirals. One reason why our welfare states are getting more and more expensive is in part just because our population is aging. But many of the same people who say we can't afford more in our welfare states because we're already spending so much on Social Security and all these other entitlements are the same people also for one, closing borders so immigrants can't come in to help build the economy and to fill gaps in the economy, and also who aren't for things that'll make it easier to have kids. I'm 33 years old. I have a lot of friends who have been putting off having kids until they save up X amount of dollars, even though they have someone they could, raise children with, because they can't afford the cost of childcare. They can't, their job probably won't give them more than 4 or 6 weeks of family leave or whatever else. Like, this is not the case in other countries. So I think there's all sorts of benefits from having a bigger welfare state. But yes, there are costs and there are going to be certain trade-offs. It's not a magical thing where you could just, have everything without trade-offs.
So in a progressive tax system, is there, to push back on the costs here, is there a point at which taxing the rich is counterproductive in the long term? So in the short term, there might be a net benefit of increasing taxes because the programs the middle class, the lower middle class gets is more beneficial. Is there a negative side to taxing the rich?
In theory, yes, of course. So one would be if you tax the rich so much, they change their consumption patterns, and that has negative impacts on the economy as a whole. You would have to kind of really model it out, but there would be a certain point in which the consumption changes might have net detrimental effects. I think that's more unlikely, and the more likely scenario is you tax corporations and other wealthy people in society to the point that they have potentially less money for productive investment, because you're in a capitalist society, so you're reliant on capitalists to invest. So you kind of don't want to be in the worst of both worlds, where you've gone too far for capitalism but not far enough for socialism. In my vision, of course, of socialism, that's one reason why we'd have to take the investment function away from capitalists. There has to be, if you're going to make it so hard for them that they can't invest or they can't employ labor the way they're employing now, you have to create another mechanism for supply to be created. And that's why, that's a transition point. Yeah.
What about longer term de-incentivizing young people that are dreaming of becoming entrepreneurs and realizing that there's this huge tax on being wealthy? So if you take these big risks, which is what's required to be an entrepreneur, and you are lucky enough to succeed and good enough to succeed, that the government will take most of your money away.
I think realistically, that's not a disincentive for most people. First of all, we already have a progressive taxation system. The government does take a bunch of the money away, and people are still striving to become rich. A lot of what people want when they dream of success is they want accolades, they want respect, and of course they want some more wealth to consume luxury goods with or whatever else. But at a certain point, it becomes better for the state to tax and either redistribute directly or through social programs, or redirect that money through tax credits and other ways to shape investment towards productive investment. We don't want a society in which a bunch of rich people fly around in helicopters going from club to club while the productive economy kind of does nothing, right? At that point, I think a lot of ordinary rich people might prefer the government to come in to tax them and to try to spur investment in certain productive sectors. So it really just depends. But I honestly believe that most people don't necessarily want to be rich for the sake of being rich. They want to be successful, and there's many different dynamics to that. And accolades and social respect is an important one of them. It's also why people who just become filthy rich often the first thing they do is start up philanthropic trusts and try to give away their money because they want the social respect and accolades and whatever else. They don't want just their money.